So it's so relaxing and helpful to be out in this kind of environment, just sitting for hours and waiting for a nest, watching a nest, waiting for something to happen. And when it happens, it's like Christmas. It's the best thing ever. The caracaras in Florida, it's an isolated population, and some recent genetic work that has just come out suggests that they may even, the population here may even qualify for subspecies distinction. And in this part of Florida, there's so much development going on, so much land conversion. So the bottom line is much of the caracaras habitat in Florida is still disappearing. And there's no new habitat being created, really. And the population is isolated. Where do those birds go? They could move, find another territory, set up a nest site, successfully continue to breed. But if the habitat is already pretty full, that might be tough. They may have to push a few neighbors around to be able to squeeze in a new territory. Or they might try to do that and not be successful. They might find a place where they can reside, but they don't reproduce successfully anymore because their territory is too small, or they fight with the neighbors or whatever. Or if they really are upset by the land conversion, they could split up as a pair and just wander for the rest of their lives, never reproducing again or finding a territory, or even just dying without ever successfully reproducing again. So there are several possibilities that could occur when a nesting pair is upset by removal or conversion of their nesting habitat. So we're trying to understand which of those possibilities might happen in various project situations. And so that means catching the adults at those nests on the projects that are going to be affected, and putting these new GPS, GSM transmitters on them to understand what their habitat use is before the project converts their territory, and then after that conversion happens, what happens to the individuals. And so, having done some raptor work in the past, I tried all the traditional methods that work pretty well with raptors. But anyway, none of those methods worked. Nothing worked. And so I came pretty close to actually giving up, because I thought, I'm never going to get this information. I can't catch these birds. But I had, at the time, a mounted bird, a taxidermy mount from the University of Florida Museum that was really pretty nice, and they let me borrow it. So I thought, well, let's just take it out around and put it by some nests and see what happens. And so I'll never forget the day we figured this out. We had found a couple nests at that point, the first 2 or 3 that we found. And I took this mount out into the middle of a pasture and just set it down kind of near the nest, because I thought, well, maybe, there's some territorial behavior or something. And there was a caracara flying around at the time. It was chasing a bald eagle. And the caracara literally did a double take. It went like this and looked at that mount and just turned and came down and knocked it over. And I thought, that's it. Now I know what we need to do to catch these birds. And so we got a hold of a pretty large bow net. You have to have a large one, because they do fly pretty fast and can turn pretty quickly for such a large raptor. They're not like eagles that are slow to get off the ground. But we eventually learned how to do it. And it turned out that we could use a live caracara as a lure to bring in the wild birds that would result in the capture. That they really ultimately don't like other adult caracaras in their nesting territory, particularly really near a nest. And that was what we used to capture them. And it worked really well. So I've caught now probably more than 100 adults that way, and affixed them with transmitters and followed them to get home range information. Back in the day, we had to fly. We flew in a small airplane with radio antennas attached to the wing struts, and did a lot of groundwork with the old waving around the Yagi antenna to get the locations. But we were able to get some of that basic information. And so that ended up being quite successful in terms of what we learned about the nesting biology and the area used by the birds. We set up this dummy trap and baited every other day for about a week, so the parents are used to coming to that site for food. And at that point, they're really interested in feeding their chicks all the time. They're desperate looking for food, and so they like to see this bait. They come to the bait. And then the actual day of the trap, we come in very early, put in fresh bait, put up the actual net, test it, make sure it works, put the taxidermy mount there. I'm hiding in the blind with the tripwire. And we find that with bait, the adults do respond to that taxidermy mount. They didn't do it if bait wasn't there, but with bait there, and they're used to coming to that bait, all of a sudden this intruder, caracara, shows up at their bait, and they don't like that. So they come in, they walk up to the bait, and in some cases have actually knocked over the taxidermy mount, and then start to feed on the bait, and they're easily captured. So that works quite well, and we now have the process down to where we know that we can pretty much capture every bird we need to. Just that there are human activities that can be compatible with the persistence of wildlife populations, and we need to uncover those and work with landowners, work with economists. I understand that lands have to provide some economic benefit to find out what those activities are and to try to focus on them so we can have some kind of coexistence between humans and all the native wildlife that everybody in Florida loves so much and hopes to protect. Well, when I was growing up, I certainly never expected to be doing something like this. Even as I went through my teens and 20s and early 30s, I never expected to be doing anything like this. But the opportunity came along, and you have to follow your passion. You have to take chances and go after challenges. And it will not only be interesting and exciting, but it will help you develop your self-confidence and your knowledge that you can make a contribution. And you can learn something really cool and have a good time doing it. Make a lot of new friends and do something good for the world and for wildlife.